This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome in, folks, to another edition of Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Tluki, and on today's episode, I got a little story from wildcard weekend in the NFL that I want to share. Also, a couple teams winning on wildcard weekend. What does that mean for the future of the Lions? And college football playoff was on Monday as well. Alabama winning big over Ohio State. Any players from that game that the Lions maybe could draft in April? We'll get into that a little bit more as well. Also, no general manager or coach announced yet at the time of the recording for the Lions. We'll dive a little deeper as to some of the other candidates that they've been interviewing and my thoughts on that as well. But hopefully everybody had a great weekend out there. Big wild card weekend. And a story about wild card weekend for me, because usually I don't watch the early playoff games. I usually take a couple weeks to decompress from the Lions. I do other things on Sunday. I still keep track of the game. I just usually don't watch the wild card or the divisional rounds. But this year was a little different. I kind of wanted to tune in a little bit more. And it's always fun, when you're able to go over to your buddy's house and watch the games. So I was really happy and fortunate to be able to do that. So this year I decided through a buddy of mine, he was doing some you get money for how many picks you get right in the playoffs. So you advance from wild card weekend to the divisional round, and then there's certain tiebreakers with the over under and all that, and you have to pick the Super Bowl MVP. And it's something that's fun. Only $10, not that bad. And so I was going through the picks literally about 10 minutes before I had to submit it. So I'm very last minute with this. I'm looking it over, and I'm thinking, I'm like, you know what? I think there's going to be a couple upsets on wildcard weekend. I'm not going the easy way with just picking the higher seeds. So obviously I picked Tampa Bay because I didn't think Washington had a chance in that game. But also I picked the Rams. I didn't think that Seattle was going to beat the Rams. It's a different atmosphere without the 12s, the 12th man over there. So I actually picked the Rams in that game. But the only game, I picked every single game right this weekend, except for one. And that one game was the Steelers versus the Browns. Oh my gosh, I was so mad. I really wanted the Steelers, not only because I had them in my picks, but it was because I just despise the Cleveland Browns. I just despise them. And that just goes back to my days of being a student at John Carroll University in Cleveland, having to deal with a lot of the annoying Browns fans sometimes. But I'm happy for Cleveland deep down, but at the time I was just really upset that Pittsburgh had lost that game. I know Pittsburgh had lost 4 of their last 5 games, but I really thought that they were just going to win at least one playoff game, at least one. But the Browns just absolutely destroyed them. We'll get into Steelers a little bit more because there's somebody in that organization that I think the Lions, they might fit the Lions as well. But I do have, so I correctly predicted 5 of the 6 games, and I'm tied for the lead, so I might get some money. It depends on how you get more points for more picks that you get correct in the later rounds. So hopefully I get some in the AFC Championship, I had the Chiefs and the Bills. NFC Championship, I had the Bucks versus the Packers. I think the Bucks could upset the Saints. Very, very hard in the NFL to beat a team 3 times. The Saints have already beaten the Bucks twice. I think Brady gets revenge in that third game in the divisional round. So I'm calling Bucks Packers. And then the Super Bowl, I've got Chiefs Packers. And it's very, very hard to repeat in the NFL, as we've seen over the years, the last decade or so. So I'm picking the Packers. I know it's the bitter rival of the Lions, but got to go with the Packers. And the tiebreaker, Aaron Rodgers, was my MVP. So I'm pretty excited, actually. And I'll definitely be watching the divisional games, hopefully, this weekend. But every year, and I don't know if Lions fans out there feel me on this, but every year the Lions are not in the playoffs, there is a little bit of me that loses a little bit of interest just because, my hometown team isn't in it. A lot of times that just doesn't make me interested. It makes me interested when the Lions are in it, but usually the earlier rounds, like I said before, I just got to decompress. I just have to, because a lot of times I just feel, man, like, why aren't the Lions in this? That's what I always question myself with. And I think that's a good transition into what I'm going to talk about next, because we saw two teams, the Browns and the Bills, win playoff games this year. Browns haven't won a playoff game since 1994, and the Bills haven't won one since 1995. So around that same time of 1991 that the Lions haven't won the playoffs, or won a playoff game. And I was thinking about this over the weekend. You know what the big differences with the Browns and the Bills are in terms of their team structure? And don't worry about talent for right now. What it is it starts from the top, right? 1994-95, when they won, Ralph Wilson was the owner of the Bills, and Art Modell was the owner of the Browns. Now they have completely different owners. They got the Pagula family, who owns New Era in Buffalo, and then now it's the Jimmy Haslam for the Browns. And they've all been recent owners, or recently new owners. So I think the Pagulas took over the Bills in 2014, and Haslam maybe 2012, somewhere around there. So recent, in the last decade. And they've just turned the franchises around, especially in the last 3 or 4 seasons. So I think that's a big reason why the Lions lag behind. Because, granted, the Lions technically do have a new owner in Sheila Hamp Ford, but it's the same family since 1963. It's the same Ford family. So I just want to know, I wonder if it's got to do with ownership. If the Lions aren't going to change, for a long term, unless it's ownership, unless the ownership changes outside the Ford family. Just something to chew on, just something to think about, because that's what happened with the Browns and the Bills, and look what happened this year. I know it's a weird year, but they both won playoff games, something that they hadn't won in over 25 years. I just want to know from this, when is it the Lions' turn? Is it when there's new ownership, whenever that's going to be, years from now maybe? Will it be in the next decade with all these new changes coming? With a new head coach, general manager? Like I've been telling people, this is arguably the most important time, the most important decision in Lions history right now. Because this is really, really going to determine the future. And it really depends on, I know Sheila's a new owner, but it depends on how different she is from the family. If she's just going to act like her mom and dad from before, making the wrong decisions, then the team probably won't, ascend to new heights. But if she's different, if she's like some of these newer owners in the NFL that are hiring and making the right decisions, we'll see. But it's just tough. It was really, really hard for me to see that and thinking, wow, the Lions, 1991, it's been 30 years now, 30 years since the Lions last won a playoff game. It's been 5 years since the Lions even made the playoffs. And Cincinnati actually has a longer playoff drought. I think their playoff drought of a win is only a year longer than us. But hey, we're not the longest in the NFL, I guess. But anyways, hopefully that decision will be made soon about the general manager and the coach. We'll get into that a little bit more later on in the program as well. Also, wanted to talk about the college football playoff. Last night, Alabama just absolutely destroying Ohio State in that championship game. Nick Saban is the Bill Belichick of college football, and I just find it really unique how he actually worked with Bill Belichick. He's really, really good friends with him. So the Bill Belichick, of the NFL is Bill Belichick, and then yet his former assistant, his good friend, Nick Saban, is basically the Bill Belichick of college football. And I just think that's really, really interesting. I know HBO did a whole documentary on that. Just something I was thinking about last night, because Nick Saban, more college football championships than anyone. Even he passed the great Bear Bryant at Alabama, something that, he was so revered. He was basically like a saint over there in Tuscaloosa, and nobody ever thought they would break his record until Saban came, and he's just been a machine ever since. But both rosters really loaded with NFL talent, Alabama and Ohio State. And I just want to know, is there anybody on any of those teams that the Lions maybe need in the draft. And, I think if the Lions were to take a quarterback in the draft, I mean, I don't think they will, and I kind of don't want them to, but I'm just saying if they were to take a quarterback, they probably would have more of a chance at Mac Jones than they would Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields, he's probably going to go to the Jets. He's definitely going to be a top 5 pick because a lot of those teams up there need a QB. And, we all know that Jacksonville will take Trevor Lawrence. And, I get it. I know the draft is in April. This is just some early statements, I guess, for, who the Lions maybe should be looking at. To be honest, I think it's more realistic that the Lions go and get Devonta Smith, the Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, we saw how dominant he was in that game. I mean, 215 yards, 3 touchdowns, basically did all that in one half. I mean, I don't know how good. He's 6'1", 175, and he's defied the odds his whole career. I mean, that's a really small receiver. I think that's the only reason why he's not the number 1 receiver in the draft. I think the number 1 receiver so far is Jamar Chase from LSU, and he didn't even play this year. So, I mean, if the Lions don't re-sign Kenny Golladay, or, they get rid of Marvin Jones and some of those other guys, you could see the Lions. I've said this a couple weeks ago. You could see the Lions draft a receiver, and Devonta Smith may be that guy. I know he's really small, and I know he's defied the odds throughout his whole career. But Alabama has this system, the Steve Sarkisian and all that they really, really use him to their advantage. And he still broke records this year, even though Alabama, they didn't play, they played a couple less games than they usually would at this stage because, of the cancellation of some games and the seasons and all that. But still, just very, very impressive from a couple of those guys on the Ohio State and Alabama rosters. And there's some linemen, too. I don't know a whole lot about the linemen yet, but Alabama's just a machine. And we've seen the Lions draft Alabama players before. We've seen them draft some Ohio State players like Taylor Decker, who is a mainstay at that left tackle position for the Lions. So we'll have to see how that goes in April. Just wanted to shout out that college football playoff, how awesome that game was for the University of Alabama. But right now, one last quick thing before we get to our interview with Matt Dery. I just wanted to update, still no GM or coach. I kind of thought maybe they would start announcing it by this time, but then towards later on last week, I was like, oh, okay, well, they're supposed to interview this guy this day, and I thought, oh, no, it's probably not going to happen. But, there was the thing with the room. There's a lot of rumors out there about things. Like there was a rumor about Saleh, how, the interview went great. And then some people were like, the interview didn't go well. So I don't, it's like, as a fan, it's like, who do you believe? Like, I don't know who to really, like, and I don't cover the team. I'm not like our good friend John Macaroon here at Detroit Sports Podcast, who's, he covers the team for Sports Illustrated, but I'm not really on the inside of anything. I'm just a fan observing. I just don't know what to believe, so that's why I kind of like to stay put on everything. And sometimes I read here and there about different candidates, but that's why I've always kind of stayed put on my favorites for general manager and coach. But for the Lions, I just wonder if they're going to hire a coach first before general manager, or a GM before coach. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how the interview process goes. But one name. And I told you we were going to mention this before when we were talking about the Steelers. One name from the Steelers that popped up, former Lions scout, actually, the director of scouting for 10 years, Kevin Colbert. There was rumors out there about him maybe applying for the Lions job. And I thought it was interesting because, obviously Chris Spielman knows Kevin Colbert really well. I mean, they knew each other even from back in the Lions days. And I talked to our good friend of the program, Corey Schlesinger, former Lions player, and he had a lot of great things to say about Kevin Colbert. He said he really brought in a lot of great players when he in the 90s. And look, the 90s was one of the best decades of Lions football we've ever seen. So, and a lot of that, tribute that to the director of college scouting, Kevin Colbert. And he's been with the Steelers for 20 years now and the general manager for most of that time. And he's built, Super Bowl teams. He's built playoff contenders. And I don't know how much of a possibility it is that Kevin Colbert comes to back to Detroit, but I'm just saying Ben Roethlisberger, he's not, he may retire, so they're probably going to lose Big Ben. That season just completely unraveled for the Steelers. And on top of that, Colbert's contract is up in May. I want to know if maybe he wants to leave. If he sees that Big Ben's out and the franchise maybe could be rebuilding in that aspect, and maybe it was one of those things that deep down he always wanted to come back to Detroit and be the GM and all that. But we'll see, because I think there were reports out there that he was contemplating retirement at one point. Kevin Colbert was, or something like that. I don't know how realistic those rumors were, but it's just something to chew on, just something to think about, because it would be a great hire if the Lions were able to get Kevin Colbert back. But we'll have to see, because it's probably not very likely that it's going to happen. But just something to think about.
And joining us now here on Open Mic Night is our good friend of the podcast, Mr. Matt Dery, the host of the Locked On Lions podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Dery Speaks as well. Matt, thanks for joining us again.
Hey, Noah. Always a pleasure, my friend. What a wild time to be a Lions fan and trying to figure out this search and everything else. It's like breaking news every 5 minutes.
That's right. Well, we're going to get into a little bit of Lions talk later. I wanted to talk about the Cleveland Browns. Of course, you're a Cleveland native and you sub in at 92.3 The Fan sometimes over in Cleveland. Just they finally won a playoff game since 1994 was the last year they won it. Bills also won in 95 since 95. They finally won. Is it the Lions' turn next, or what's going on here? Are you happy for Cleveland?
I am. I think Browns fans, as you know, are starving for a winner. They want something to get excited about. And 3 years removed from 0-16, finally finding the right people at the top. Andrew Berry, the general manager, Kevin Stefanski, the head coach. That's what it's all about. And obviously, that's what the Lions are trying to duplicate and do. But the Browns have good talent. Even before Barry got there and John Dorsey ran the team for a couple of years, they've drafted well. The guys that are the studs on that team, the Baker Mayfields, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Nick Chubb, Jedrick Wills, those are all high draft picks who have all worked out, who all can play. Then you sprinkle in some free agents like Jack Conklin and Jarvis Landry, and they've done well. And they deserve to get these accolades because they're building it right. They have a good foundation now, good culture, and they block and tackle. That's the biggest thing in the NFL. And I know everybody talks about weapons and quarterbacks, and they got to have that stuff, but they do it right. They're good up front on both sides of the ball, and now they're in the Final Four of the AFC. It's pretty impressive.
Speaking of building a team, as you mentioned, the Lions, it's just crazy right now what's going on, and they're just waiting it out. Last time they only interviewed 3 candidates. Now, and according to some reports, 12 candidates now that they've interviewed for the general manager spot among Ed Dodds, Brad Holmes. But now there's a report right now about Kevin Colbert from the Steelers, something that you said would probably never happen. But now, there's a report now. It seems like it's going to happen maybe.
It's possible. I'm stunned because now let's talk about this for a second. No national people have said a word about it. Nobody in Pittsburgh has said anything about it. Yes, Jason Lockenfora from CBS said a couple weeks ago that the Lions were definitely interested in Kevin Colbert, and why not? The Lions, to their credit, have cast a very wide net and have talked to just about everybody. They even, were floating this idea of John Schneider. And people are going to say, well, that was a report. I have it on pretty good authority that the Lions floated that out there. They want people to think this is that they're going for it, that they're going for the best of the best. And Kevin Colbert is one of the top GMs in the league. He's 64 years old. He's been on a series of one-year deals with the Steelers. Unless the Lions are offering so much money, and I have a hard time thinking that a Pittsburgh guy who went home 20 some odd years ago and helped build this dynasty there and won 2 Super Bowls would come back to Detroit in his mid-60s. Now, maybe there's some sort of plan in place where after a couple of years he hands the team over to his son. His son, Dan, is a personnel guy with the Steelers. I don't know. But Mike Stone of the Ticket reporting that they've offered him this job and that it's close. I was just texting with Stoney, and he's like, we'll see. I don't know who his source is, but this would certainly surprise me. It'd be a home run. I think Kevin's great.
Well, yeah, as you know, the Steelers really like to keep it in-house with the family. You know, the Rooney family has been, only 3 head coaches since 1969. Maybe you're right. Maybe they do something where they hand it down to the son of Kevin Colbert later on. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Brad Holmes and Ed Dodds. Those were also some more realistic candidates, I guess. Brad Holmes, of course, the Rams director of college scouting, and one of the assistant general managers for the Colts is Ed Dodds. What do you know about these guys? And do you think these guys are culture builders, the guys that Chris Spielman and company really want to build this franchise?
Yeah, I think they're both good candidates. Brad Holmes started actually in the media relations and public relations department. Talk about a guy that for 18 years has moved way up. He was putting press releases together and just wanted to be around football, and then moved up to scouting. And then, director of college scouting, like you said, he's got Detroit ties. Luther Bradley is his uncle. Luther, of course, is a Lions legend from the 70s. And so he's been around Detroit. He's been around the Lions. And I think he's a good candidate. The Rams, you can't argue with how they've drafted in the past. Aaron Donald, of course, is one of the greatest draft picks in any team's history. The guy is as good a defensive player as there ever has been in this league. So why not give him a second interview? Maybe he had a great first one. You give him a second one. He's an African-American guy that I know that the Lions have had black coaches and GMs in the past. But if you look at their front office and a lot of their business side, they don't have a ton of diversity. So Brad Holmes would be obviously check that box, but he's pretty well respected. Again, has the Detroit ties. Ed Dodds, kind of a badass. He kind of just tells it like it is in interviews I've seen with him where it's Super Bowl or bust for him. He's been with some really good franchises, Seattle and the Colts. He has ties to some Detroit candidates. Dan Campbell interviewed for the Colts job a few years ago when it went to Frank Reich, and Ed Dodds was in on that interview process with Chris Ballard, the GM. Campbell didn't get the job, Reich did, and you see the success that Frank has had there. And then, of course, Darrell Bevell was the OC with the Seahawks, and that was when Ed Dodds was one of the pro personnel people with the Seattle Seahawks, so he's got some ties with Detroit there. I like Ed Dodds. Everywhere he's been, he's won. He was with Seattle and that program, and now the Colts are a playoff team every year, so I don't think you can go wrong with either guy.
So transitioning now over to maybe some more head coaching candidates, and I don't really want to get into as much of the head coaches before there's a general manager named, but they have interviewed 7 head coaches and 12 general managers, like I mentioned before. So do you think this is a good thing that the Lions are, taking a long time on this and really looking at every possible option here?
Yeah, I have no issue with it. I think they're doing the right thing by talking to just about everybody. I just know, I think they're jumping around a little bit. I don't know. What's the plan? Is the plan to hire a general manager first and then a coach? Well, Rod Wood said not necessarily. Then, it seems like now they want a GM because the GMs are getting second opportunities. I don't know of any of the coaching candidates yet that have gotten second interviews or in-person interviews yet. So from that standpoint, it's a little, it's a little jumpy. The Robert Saleh situation, I thought that would be a slam dunk and he would be the coach before they had a GM. But there were reports he didn't do well in the interview. Then there were reports that he did fine in the interview. Dave Burkett of the Free Press saying, well, Darrell Bevell's interview was better than Robert Saleh's. I'm sorry, but no. If Darrell Bevell is higher on their list than Robert Saleh, then something is wrong. God bless Darrell Bevell, but come on here. I mean, Saleh's defenses in San Francisco have been lights out. He's got so much energy. He's from here. And it appears he could be headed to the Jets because he's got a second interview with them. So from that standpoint, yes, I like that they're offering it and not offering it. They're talking to everybody. But I think they're a little all over the place too. And, again, though, we're talking about Rod Wood and Sheila Ford Hamp. So we're not talking about football experts here running this thing.
So I want to ask you a little bit more about the interview process, what it's been going like for the Lions. Dave Burkett coming on the Mike Valenti show with Rico a couple days ago, and he mentioned that some people have said that interviewing for the Lions positions, it's like interviewing for a family business, whereas other teams, it's like interviewing for a Fortune 500 company. Do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, or what do you think he means by that? I think it's interesting.
Well, I mean, every ownership, you could look at all these openings and say, you paint the picture of what's there. And what's there for the Lions right now is, you're right. It's almost like you've got to fit into that Ford family culture, if you want to call it that. If you go into the interview and Rod Wood is talking to you and you can sense that this individual does not know anything about football, which Rod said he didn't know anything about it 5 years ago, and you maybe say something like, well, Rod, I'm going to make that call, not you. That would turn the Fords off because you're talking like that to Rod. But again, Rod doesn't know anything about football. It's a weird dynamic because most of these owners have some football knowledge. Jeffrey Lurie in Philadelphia has been around winning franchises and won a Super Bowl. Howie Roseman, whether you think Howie Roseman is just some, nerdy former lawyer that's running the Eagles, they've won. Sheila Ford Hamp, she inherited the team from her mother, who inherited it from her father. They've never won anything. They've never built this the right way. They've hired some really, really bad general managers. Two of the worst, maybe you could argue, in NFL history, in Matt Millen and Bob Quinn. So it's weird. It's like there isn't that history there of we know what we're doing. So I think when people say you got to fit the Ford culture, I mean, I don't know. Now you got Chris Spielman in the mix. I happen to like Chris. Is the next general manager going to hand the reins? Like, let's say this Kevin Colbert thing happens. Is Chris Spielman the next in line? Kevin's 64. So let's say Kevin says, I'll do this for a couple of years. The Lions then may tell him, okay, you're going to hand the reins over to Chris in 2 years. But then isn't that too many chefs in the kitchen? There might be some GM candidates that are saying, wait a minute, what is this former player that was a broadcaster? And Chris is a brilliant guy. But Chris doesn't have any experience. Is he going to be lingering around the hallways, hearing about a transaction and running to Rod or Sheila? Some GM candidates don't want that. They don't want somebody in the hallway or in their doorway asking what's going on. They want to be left alone. So that's the kind of, when people talk about the Fords and Rod Wood and this is what they're talking about. It's that it's a little scattered.
Talking to Matt Dery from the Locked On Lions podcast. I want to switch gears now more to the players' side of things. You saw that national championship game on Monday, Alabama just cruising with a win over Ohio State. There's talk of some players from that game possibly being drafted by the Lions. You think of guys like Devonta Smith, the wide receiver. I mean, if Justin Fields, the quarterback, or Mac Jones, if they fall to the Lions, even some linemen in the mix as well. Do you think, are there any players from that game on either side, Alabama or Ohio State, that really stand out to you that you think the Lions, they have to go get this guy to in order to build for the future?
Well, number one, I'll tell you whose stock really went down in that game is Shaun Wade, the cornerback from Ohio State. Now, I don't think the Lions are going to take a cornerback from Ohio State again after what happened last year, but again, it'll be a different general manager. The Lions need corners. If Shaun Wade were there in the second round, it was weeks ago that he was a top 15, top 20 pick. I think his stock has dropped. As far as players on Alabama, I mean, Noah, what a roster, what a what a machine Nick Saban has down there. Devontae Smith, to me, is a no-brainer. And I know that fans will say, well, another receiver, that's how many times the Lions been burned by taking a receiver early. Obviously, Calvin Johnson worked, but Big Mike Williams didn't. Roy Williams didn't. Who am I missing? The other receiver that was a total bust for the Lions. Charles Rogers didn't. Eric Ebron, if you want to call him a receiver, didn't. So fans will say you can't take a receiver. I think Devontae Smith is amazing. I think he's incredible. I don't care about his size, the speed, the hands, the route running. It's a no-brainer for me. As far as anybody else, I mean, obviously Dickerson didn't really play, but that's an O-lineman that a team would build around. He's a center. The Lions have a center. If you wanted to move him to guard, go for it. Landon Dickerson is going to be a tremendous pro. The Lions need defense. And off the top of my head, the guys that I saw the other night from Alabama, I don't know if there's anybody in that class that would be the 7th pick material. But, Najee Harris is a running back. The Lions don't need to do that again. He'd be gone by the time the Lions had interest in him. But I would have no issue taking Devontae Smith. I really, Jalen Waddle, I guess, but I wouldn't take him at 7. Smith, I would.
Final question for you, Matt. We've talked a lot about it before. Matthew Stafford, really the keys to this franchise's success. Really, it really depends on him. Do you think the Fords or Rod Wood, do you think they're going to hire a guy, general manager, head coach, they're going to hire somebody that's really sold on keeping Matthew Stafford here? Because it seems like the Fords and Rod Wood really, really want to keep Matthew Stafford. They don't want to deal him or anything like that. They want to make sure that he's around for the next few years.
I think the Fords want him to stay. I think the only reason he would go is if he and Kelly went to Martha. I don't even think they would go to Sheila or Rod. I think they would go right to Martha because of their relationship with her. When they had their 4th child this year, Martha was there, like literally days after she was born, the daughter was born. There was a picture of Martha holding the baby. I think they'd go to Martha and say, you know what, it's been 12 years. Love you guys. Get us out of here. Like it's just, but I don't think they know yet. And I think Matthew wants to see what they're doing. I said this on my podcast yesterday. I don't have any source on this. I don't have anything guaranteed on this. But I think the Lions weeks ago were very hot and heavy in pursuing Pat Fitzgerald or Matt Campbell, the 2 college coaches. That will never come out publicly because those interviews are done secretly so that Campbell and Fitzgerald, if they stay at their colleges, don't get killed in recruiting and don't get killed by the alumni, the fan bases, the boosters about your jumping ship. You ever notice they always say, oh, this guy interviewed. And they publicly, heck, the Lions are tweeting out. We had an interview with Todd Bowles or whatever. They're going to have it on Friday. But they're not putting on their Twitter that they talked to a college coach that's under contract somewhere else. So I think if they would have gotten Matt Campbell, let's just use that as an example, a young, energetic, up-and-coming offensive mind, I think Stafford would have been like, ooh, wow, like that's outside the box. I love to work with Matt Campbell. I'm not going to go to the Fords. I'll stay. But if let's say they hired, I don't know, Todd Bowles, would Stafford go, a defensive coordinator who's failed already as a head coach? Get me out of here. So I think it would be the only way he leaves is if he asks to leave. I don't think the family, I don't think Wood, I don't think any of them are viewing him leaving in any stretch because I think they don't view this as a rebuild and a restart. They view this as more of a retool where if they can get a few pieces on defense that they'll still win games next year.
Straight up, general manager, head coach, who is it?
You want me to make a prediction?
I guess so.
Obviously, if they got Colbert, that would be the biggest home run, and I would be stunned by it. But it wouldn't surprise me if this was a, Brad Holmes, Marvin Lewis situation, Jeff Ireland and Dan Campbell, Ed Dodds and Dan Campbell, something like that. I think it's all over the place right now. To make a hard and steadfast prediction right now, I don't think I'd be very accurate with it.
Well, folks, you heard it from the best. Matt Dery, the host of the Locked On Lions podcast. You can find that anywhere, any podcast provider. You can also follow him on Twitter at Dery Speaks, Dery Speaks. Thanks again, Matt, for joining us. You're the best.
Thank you, Noah. Always a pleasure, buddy. Keep up the great work.
Want to thank our good friend Matt Dery for coming on. He's awesome. I love when he gives us his Lions insight. Really, really good stuff. As always, and just talking about this news general manager and coaches. What's going to happen? What are the Lions going to do? I'm a fan of this team, as you guys know, really die hard, and I want answers. But I really like how the Lions are interviewing a vast array of candidates. So it should be an interesting next week or so. Hopefully, by the time we do the podcast next week, we will have an announcement to make, and it'll be really exciting as well. So looking forward to that. I was trying to work some basketball in this week. But there was just too many NFL stories, too many Lions stories to not talk about. So hopefully, probably going to talk a lot more football until the Lions hire a general manager and coach, and then a little bit after that, we'll start working some basketball in for some of you basketball fans out there. I mean, hey, we might even work some Red Wings hockey in. We'll have to play it by ear. We'll have to see. I know they just started up as well. So thanks again, folks, for tuning in. Hopefully next week we'll have an announcement for general manager and head coach of your Detroit Lions. And thank you again for tuning in to Open Mic Night.